Welcome to Inside East African Politics. We're doing a deep dive today into, well, a really critical debate that's playing out in Ethiopia right now. It's all about investment.
That's right. Where should limited resources go for the best future growth? It's a fundamental question.
Exactly. We've been looking at some material that explores the government's big corridor development project. And it raises some pretty sharp questions, comparing that project to maybe focusing much more on industrialization instead.
Yeah, this material really pushes you to ask, what kind of investment truly delivers? The kind that lifts the most people sustainably.
Right. So our mission here is to unpack these different views, the claims and counterclaims about the corridor project based on the insights we've looked at. The core tension seems to be, is spending big on city beautification the right move for a developing economy, especially compared to, say, building factories?
It really gets to the heart of development strategy. Is it about broad-based growth or, well, maybe more cosmetic changes?
Okay, let's get into it. First off, what is this corridor development project we're talking about? What does the analysis describe?
So the material presents it as a major government plan. The goal is modernizing cities across Ethiopia. Think new roads, proper bike lanes, walkways for pedestrians, public parks, basically improving the whole urban environment.
And this isn't just happening in Addis Ababa, right? It's wider than that.
Oh yeah, much wider. The analysis stresses the scale. It mentions at least 58 cities nationwide are part of this. Addis is a big focus, but it's broad.
58 cities, wow, that's a huge national push.
Definitely.
But the sources we looked at also present a pretty critical take on it, don't they?
They do, quite pointedly. It cites local experts who are worried. They're calling it a poor use of very scarce national funds. Some critics quoted feel the benefits just aren't clear and that it's a serious misprioritization given other really urgent needs in the country.
Right, which leads directly to the core argument being explored in this material, the central thesis for our deep dive today.
Exactly. The perspective laid out is forceful. Ethiopia's #1 priority has to be industrialization, not these big urban beautification projects. The argument is, fundamentally, the country needs factories. It needs factory jobs first to really drive the economy and create work.
So a stark choice presented there. Okay, let's explore the case for putting industrialization first as the material lays it out. What's the biggest argument?
Jobs. It really comes down to jobs, jobs, jobs. The analysis hammers this point. Industry can create employment, literally by the thousands. And it notes this actually lines up with the government's own stated goals. Official policy identifies industrial growth as the way to, quote, transform the economy, reduce poverty, and provide jobs.
And this isn't just a theory, right? The sources point to actual results we can see from existing industrial parks.
Absolutely. It's not theoretical. The industrial zones already up and running have shown real success. Tens of thousands of stable jobs created. Textiles, leather goods, food processing, real industries.
Tens of thousands of steady jobs. That's key. Is there a specific example highlighted in the sources?
Yes, the Hawassa Industrial Park comes up quite a bit. It's noted that this one park, just Hawassa, employs many, many tens of thousands of workers directly.
Wow.
That number alone gives you a sense of the employment power packed into these hubs.
That's a huge number. A really powerful example of industrial impact.
What about smaller businesses? Does supporting them factor in?
It does. The analysis also suggests that backing small and medium enterprises, SMEs, the smaller manufacturers, pays off significantly too. There's a specific story shared about a World Bank-supported program that illustrates this.
Ah, yes, the packaging firm in Addis. Tell us about that.
Right, so this small company got what sounds like a relatively modest grant, specifically for new machinery, and according to the account, that single investment directly led to them boosting sales by around $97,000. And crucially, hiring many more people.
Just from buying some machinery. Yeah, it's presented as a clear case. Invest in the actual tools of production for manufacturers, and you quickly see more output, more jobs, right there at the local level.
A very direct return. Okay, so local jobs, support for smaller firms. What about the bigger picture, the national economy, bringing in foreign currency?
That's another critical point emphasized. The things made in these factories, they get exported. And that brings in hard currency, which is vital. The sources suggest that because of these industrial parks, exports of finished goods like garments, leather products have seen substantial growth.
And selling finished goods, that's different economically than just exporting raw materials, isn't it?
Oh, fundamentally different.
Yeah.
The analysis points out that by turning raw materials into finished products before exporting, Ethiopia earns much more value per item. It's called value addition, and it helps the country's trade balance. It's a key part of moving up the economic ladder, basically.
Okay, so a strong case is built for industry based on jobs, local growth, and exports. Now let's dig into the comparison the sources make. Why is industry argued to deliver more economic impact than these corridor projects?
It really boils down to the nature of the activity, and crucially, how long it lasts.
How so?
Well, factories, as the analysis stresses, they run continuously, year in, year out. The jobs they provide are lasting. People build skills, earn wages over the long haul. Corridor construction, on the other hand, it mainly creates temporary work. Construction crews, landscapers, maybe security guards while it's being built. But once the physical work is done,
The jobs disappear.
exactly, those jobs largely vanish.
So one is building the thing that is the end product. The other is building something that keeps producing things. The sources make a pretty stark numerical comparison here, too.
They do. It mentions 2 new industrial parks that are expected to open soon. Together, they're projected to create something like 46,000 new jobs combined. And the analysis contrasts this sharply. It argues that no single road project, no park construction, no matter how big, can generate that kind of number of lasting, ongoing jobs.
46,000 lasting jobs from just 2 sites versus temporary construction roles spread thin. That's a really clear difference in scale and sustainability.
Absolutely.
What about the wider economic ripple effects, the multiplier effect?
Right. Industry is described as having a much higher economic value because of that multiplier. A factory isn't just about its own payroll. It creates business for a whole chain of suppliers, power companies, material providers, transport firms, and like we said, it earns export dollars. The analysis credits industrial parks with significantly boosting Ethiopia's overall manufacturing output and exports. Every single item produced sends ripples through the economy.
And the corridors, they don't do that.
The perspective offered is that they primarily serve other functions, aesthetics, maybe making traffic flow better, beautification. They don't actually produce goods to be sold or exported, so they lack that broad, dynamic multiplier effect that comes from productive activity.
Okay, so manufacturing builds an entire economic ecosystem, while these urban projects, helpful as they might seem, don't really generate new value in the same way. What about skills? Building capacity for the future.
That's another angle. Manufacturing jobs, according to the analysis, are vital for training workers. People learn specialized productive skills. That builds human capital, boosts earning potential over time. And industrial areas create demand for other services nearby: cafes, shops, housing. Urban corridors, the analysis suggests, just don't have that same power to generate widespread economic demand or build up a skilled workforce on a large scale.
And there's an ongoing cost issue with the corridors, too, isn't it, Mitch?
Yes, that's highlighted as a key difference. Once a corridor is built, you have to maintain it. Roads need repairs, parks need upkeep. That costs money, continuously, but it doesn't generate new income itself. Contrast that with a factory, which keeps producing goods, generating revenue, creating value over its whole lifespan.
So it's the difference between an investment that pays for itself and grows versus one that's mainly an upfront cost followed by more costs.
That's the core distinction being drawn. One generates wealth, the other primarily consumes it after the initial build.
Right. This brings us to a really critical argument in the analysis, the idea that sequence is incredibly important in development.
Hugely important. The argument laid out is both historical and, well, logical. It points out that pretty much every developed nation built its industrial base first. Factories came first. Then, the wealth generated from making and selling things was used to fund the big infrastructure projects, the urban improvements. The perspective is Ethiopia should follow that proven path.
And this connects back to Ethiopia's own planning documents.
It does. The analysis notes the government's own long-term vision actually says industrialization must be the main engine for creating jobs and income. So the logic presented is simple. Build the economic engine that makes the money first, and then you'll have the funds for the nice-to-have urban upgrades.
Build the factory to pay for the road, not hope the road somehow pays for itself. The analysis sounds quite concerned about the risks of getting that sequence wrong.
Very concerned. It frames the current corridor focus as a misplaced priority, even a major misprioritization given Ethiopia's current economic situation. The argument is pouring massive funds into these beautification projects right now when the country is grappling with high unemployment, serious foreign currency shortages, significant debt is actually dangerous. Spending billions on parks and walkways before tackling those fundamentals could, according to this view, make the economic problems worse, not better.
The opportunity cost sounds immense, and the analysis also suggests learning from what's already working on the ground.
Yes, there's a strong emphasis on the fact that Ethiopia's industrial parks have already demonstrated they can work. They deliver jobs, they deliver exports. So the argument is pretty straightforward. Scale up what's proven successful, build more factories, create more industrial park space, invest in training young people for those productive jobs. The perspective is clear. Things like fancy urban corridors should wait until after that core industrial base is strong and generating wealth.
Double down on the proven engine before spending on things that are less directly productive. Now, the sources do acknowledge arguments for the corridors. What's one point they address?
Well, they acknowledge the claim from supporters that the corridors do create some jobs. During the construction phase, building crews, landscapers, security.
Fair enough. But what's the counterpoint offered in the analysis?
The rebuttal is sharp. Those jobs are overwhelmingly temporary. Once the road is paved or the park is built, the work dries up. This is contrasted directly with industrial projects, which provide long-term employment. Like we said, those parks employ tens of thousands year after year. The comparison is framed starkly. Building a factory pays off with decades of jobs. Building a sidewalk pays off for a few months.
That difference between temporary work and lasting careers seems absolutely central to the critique.
It is.
What about the claim that these nice new corridors will boost tourism? That comes up too.
Yes, and the analysis treats this argument fairly. It notes that, sure, a pleasant urban environment can potentially help tourism. It even includes a view from someone in the tourism sector who said the new walkways in Addis have made it a bit easier to show tourists certain sites, and acknowledges corridors might include things like cafes or rest spots.
So it doesn't just dismiss the idea out of hand, but there's a rebuttal based on what tourism experts say are the real issues.
Exactly. The counterpoint, drawing on tourism expert insights within the material, is that Ethiopia's main tourism problems aren't a lack of nice sidewalks in cities. The big bottlenecks identified are things like a shortage of decent hotels, not enough skilled staff in hospitality, poor transport to the major attractions, and weak international marketing. The argument is basically building a fancy plaza in Addis won't bring in hordes of tourists if they still struggle to find a good room near Lalibela or reliable transport to the Simien Mountains. Those are the real barriers.
Right. Tourists come for Lalibela for the history, the landscapes, not primarily for a new bike lane in the capital.
That's the emphasis. Ethiopia's draw is unique. Its history, culture, natural beauty. The investment priority this analysis suggests should be on enhancing access and amenities related to those core attractions, upgrading the road to Gondar, improving hotels near key sites that's seen as having a direct impact.
And the sources even float a specific idea for funding those targeted tourism improvements.
They do. It mentions economists suggesting a dedicated, maybe modest tourism tax. The revenue from that tax would be ring-fenced specifically for building tourist facilities, improving infrastructure at the key sites, training staff. The logic is simple. A small levy that directly funds better hotels or roads in places like Axum or Lalibela will do far more to grow tourism than spending the same amount on general urban corridors.
That makes sense, aligning the investment directly with the specific identified gaps in the tourism sector.
Precisely. Targeting the actual bottlenecks.
Okay, this analysis also raises a very serious point about the social costs associated with the corridor projects.
Yes, it does. This is a significant part of the critique. The material highlights documented negative impacts, particularly displacement. It references, for example, an Amnesty International report finding that in Addis Ababa alone, at least 872 people, including children, the elderly, were forcibly evicted from their homes to make way for corridor construction.
872 people just in the capital. That's a heavy social cost.
It is. And the analysis contrasts this starkly. This is a direct harm, often impacting vulnerable people, for a project whose economic benefits to the wider population are questioned. The point is made that investing that same money in factories would likely employ families from poorer communities, potentially stabilizing them rather than driving them from their land.
A very troubling contrast. Okay, we've covered the arguments for industry, the critique of the corridors, the counter-arguments, the social costs. Let's talk about the alternative path forward suggested in the material.
The alternative path is pretty clear. Essentially, redirect the resources. Instead of pouring billions into the corridors, invest that money in building more factories and industrial parks. Use the funds for another textile complex or a leather processing zone.
And supporting existing businesses, too.
Yes, absolutely. Things like providing grants and training for local SMEs, similar to that Boreau packaging firm example, to help them expand production and hire more people, using incentives effectively like tax breaks or subsidized electricity to attract more manufacturers, which Ethiopia has already started doing with some success.
And the expected result of this shift?
A chain reaction of jobs and growth. It points back to those upcoming industrial parks expected to create around 46,000 jobs as evidence that industry is delivering and can deliver more if prioritized.
So double down on industry. What about the tourism side of the alternative?
On tourism, the suggestion is equally practical. Spend the money on upgrading the assets tourists actually come to see and use. Improve the roads and basic infrastructure around the national parks and the famous heritage sites. Build or renovate hotels in those key tourist areas. Train hospitality staff properly. Market Ethiopia's unique attractions more effectively abroad.
Using funds, perhaps like that suggested tourism tax, for very specific, targeted improvements.
Exactly. Use tourism revenue to fix tourism bottlenecks. A small levy funding better hotels and roads directly serving sites like Lalibela or Axum is argued to be a much smarter investment for tourism growth than a generic city beautification project.
Okay, let's bring this all together. How does the analysis ultimately characterize the corridor development project policy? What's the final takeaway from the sources?
Well, the conclusion presented in the material is pretty unambiguous. The corridor policy, as currently implemented and prioritized, is portrayed as essentially a failed initiative for Ethiopia's development needs. It's seen as demanding huge investment upfront, but offering very little in terms of lasting, broad-based economic benefit in return.
And it's come with significant downsides, as we discussed.
Yes, the negative outcomes are highlighted: the displacement of people from their homes, the potential for raising expectations that aren't met economically for the majority.
All while the country's fundamental needs remain incredibly pressing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The analysis constantly circles back to this. Ethiopia desperately needs jobs. It needs real, sustainable economic growth to lift living standards for its large and growing population.
And this is where that contrast with industrialization becomes so stark in the conclusion.
It really does. The material concludes by strongly reiterating the proven power of factories and industrial parks. They have demonstrated they can employ large numbers of people, they can generate export revenue, directly addressing those core national needs.
So the final argument presented is a call for a fundamental shift.
It is, a very forceful one. The conclusion basically says, given the proven track record of industry, and the questionable returns and even negative impacts of the corridor projects, it makes little sense to continue prioritizing the corridors. The argument is that Ethiopia should halt major spending on what the analysis terms ornamental corridors, and instead go all in on industrialization and those practical targeted tourism upgrades. The core message couldn't be clearer. Build the factories first. Build the engines of jobs and wealth. That's the essential foundation for a better future, not fancy walkways.
That analysis certainly gives us, and you listening, a lot to chew on regarding development choices. It really makes you think. As you reflect on this, maybe consider development projects happening where you live. Are they mostly focused on things you can see easily, perhaps shorter-term improvements? Or are they the less visible foundational investments aimed at creating long-term jobs and real economic value? Something to think about.